We'll give it a couple minutes while stragglers show up, but I don't think we're going to have a huge group today. So we'll dive right into whatever adventures we want to get into. How's everybody's bodies feeling, especially those who have done some walking in the last week?
Surprisingly good.
I'm feeling fine.
Great. Great.
How are you feeling, JJ?
Pretty okay. You know,
Good.
I have this little tiny bit of concern for our friend Megan, who wasn't able to join us on Sunday because she fell on the ice as she was heading out of her door and broke her butt, as she says. So I'm hoping that that was just a metaphor and not an actual fracture, and that she is well. And that has prompted me to add those ice traction things to the packing list for when we next set out in that kind of weather, which hopefully won't be for a while. Hi, Sarah, welcome. Oh, and everyone starts off muted, by the way, so you'll have to hit the space bar to unmute yourself. We won't be too big a group. Welcome. Hey, Chloe. So we might have some other stragglers trickle in. I think maybe we should start talking. About half of you have, or more than half of you have done some chunk of this adventure of walking the perimeter of Philadelphia. A couple of you haven't. Well, maybe take a little bit. This is going to be real informal, but my suggestion is that we talk a little bit about the shape of this crazy city we live in. Most of us live in. I'm not sure where all of you are calling in from, and we kind of go through some of what this most recent iteration of this walk around the city's edge looked like, what we can learn from it, where it might go next. Hey, Delphine. So for those of you who haven't taken a good look at the map or who want to look at it again, this is the majority of Philadelphia minus the little corner of the Northeast over there. I'm currently coming at you from West Philly over this way. Our downtown core right around here. Broad Street is our major north-south axis. Market Street, our major east-west axis. And a little week and a half ago, on Sunday the 7th, a couple of us started walking from my place 2 miles or so out to the edge of the city here at 61st in Baltimore. And from there, we were setting out to walk around the edge of the city following the perimeter. The basic operating principles of Walk Around Philadelphia are real straightforward. It's go to the city's edge and stay as close to the border as you can. There's a couple more subtleties to it, but the main ideas are to explore the city by discovering the edges of it. It's not hard and fast. You may be right on the perimeter, you may be far from it. It's all within reason, within comfort, within safety. There's not turn-by-turn directions because the path changes every time. Someone might want to go a different way. There might be an obstacle. There might be a place that was always blocked off in the past that all of a sudden has opened up. So I've always gone clockwise this way around the city. But there's different things to be discovered if you go the other way. I've always gone in February, except for this past September when it was a whole different thing. And every time there's been new discoveries and new surprises. Before we start narrating quickly the shape of the city, does anyone have any questions they want to dive in with? With a group this size, I think we can easily just kind of jump in and flow organically. So anyone want to jump in with a question before we take a look at the shape of the city? Okay, I won't leave us hanging in awkward pauses. So I'm also going to invite you to just jump on in with the questions rather than me leaving you hanging for little chunks like that. So Cobbs Creek Park and the creeks here are the southwestern edge of the city. We started at 61st in Baltimore and went up this way. And there's an interesting transition point when all of a sudden you walk out of the wooded creek path and you find yourself on golf courses. And then from the golf courses, you transition into City Ave, which is a sort of a straight line. We go from this fluid zigzag to this straight line drawn on a map of City
I have a
Ave.
quick question, JJ.
Yeah, please, Garth.
So when you're in that part and you go across Market Street there and you're kind of going, can you stay right along Cobbs Creek by kind of where the 69th Street thing is on the other side? Are you able to hug the
You can. You can, and it's interesting because there's a choice to be made to follow, there's either a path that goes right down along the creek, or there's another bit of walking path that's more along the side of the roads, whatever, 63rd or whatever else it is there. I've never taken that one. And it's interesting because as I noticed several times on this iteration of the walk, there are times when I'm like, no, this is the way. But the actual operating principles of this thing are to follow the group. So there's definitely places where I tried to step back and let other people make some choices, and sometimes steer a little bit, because I know if we go this way, we'll encounter this treasure. But you know what? If we didn't go this way, we'd encounter another treasure. So there's always sort of a bit of discovery. But there you can actually hug pretty close to the creek, all the way up to the golf courses.
Okay.
All the way up to City Ave. Tricky part of City Ave is getting across the bridge here. The first year we did it, we didn't think it was passable. And so we went down to the Falls Bridge. The high school students who did it this fall, they went up to, I've forgotten its name, the Pencoid Bridge up into Manioc. There is a footpath on the City Ave Bridge with wheelchair curb cuts and all, but to get to it, you actually have to basically walk along the side of the highway for a hot minute under I-76. Our group opted to do that. We took the sort of straight line path and found that actually there was sort of a sidewalk had been created by the mounded snow. So that was an interesting thing. There's a couple places along the way where the snow this time facilitated access, like to walk along a rail bed or to, in this case, be protected from traffic in a relatively high traffic area. From there, the path is the Schuylkill River, straight on up through Manioc and along the river. And then it makes a set of 90-degree turns in these sort of like zigzag shapes up around Chestnut Hill, a straight line up, over, and some more zigs, all the way down the length of Cheltenham Avenue. Here, the path is a rail line, and it does this funny little bump out along Cotman Ave by the Fox Chase Cancer Center. Here, the line is somewhat of a straight line with funny little curves to it, and the road doesn't always follow. So we actually were slightly in on Pine Road. There's a couple different ways to navigate it here. There's places when you look up close at the map, you realize like that person's front yard is not in Philadelphia, but their house is, or 1/3 of that person's house is in Philadelphia, and it gets pretty strange. All the way up to the northeast, there's a fabulous cemetery up this way, and then County Line Road is sort of another straight shot. We go onto the back of the map here, I'm not gonna flip it, but then if you look at the shape of the city, there's a sort of little like zigzag little corner up here, which is the Pequessing Creek, which is our water border on this edge, squiggles all the way down to Glen Ford, where it dumps into the Delaware River. And then the border is just the middle of the Delaware, all the way on down around the Navy Yard, until it does some really funny things down here. There's some sharp angles around the airport. Looking closely, we realized this time that, okay, Fort Mifflin is on one side of the border and the Sunoco fuel processing place is on the other side, and the line that seems to be drawn really to divide those two. A fraction of the airport is within Philadelphia. 6 times out of 7 when doing this walk, we've been pretty completionist and decided to include the airport, which means this long detour out along Hog Island, which adds about 10 miles to the adventure. And gets to be a bit of a long slog, but also has some really beautiful moments along the river there. From the airport, then the border goes up through the Heinz Wildlife Refuge. This is another interesting crossing point to navigate. And then back again along the creek, following Darby Creek and Cobbs Creek. You know, there's a lot of different things like the super fun toxic waste site here and other adventures, Mount Moriah Cemetery, some beautiful meadows, and then we come right back to where we started. But right back to where we started, having seen some things, learned some things, gotten a different perspective on the city, and made some new friends along the way. And so I'm gonna say there, are there any next questions before we dive in about this adventure? From maybe someone, let's hear a question from someone who has not walked any part of this.
Can you hear me, JJ?
All clear.
Oh, sorry, I'm on my phone and there's a little swiping to the screen where I get mic action.
You're
Sorry.
doing great. All good.
Oh, I'm so impressed and so excited to hear these things. I have, my only question is about the So the walk that I did not do was from like the Schuylkill River edge. I'm pointing to my phone. You can't see me.
Yep.
Yeah, and up around
Day
Chestnut
two,
Hill
yeah,
and down,
up to about
across
there.
Charlton. So I had so much fun zooming in on Google and like figuring out the details, and was just curious if you guys cut through the farm there. I didn't know about the little farm, and I felt like the city line was through the middle of the farm, and that would have been like. So I have two questions: which side of the border is the farm on, or do you even know? And can you enter the farm from River Road, or do you have to kind of go around?
So, good question. Right where the border actually makes its turn, we stopped the first day at the Mequon station, which is slightly outside of Philadelphia, just a little bit past. And right where the border sort of makes that 90-degree turn and goes up the river is pretty much a bit of a cliff face. So you don't go right exactly at that spot. It's not like City Avenue where there's a straight, like here is the border path, but we stay as close to it as possible. There's kind of three options there. One is to go slightly outside of Philadelphia and meander your way along some winding roads here by, there's an old abandoned mill you'll find on a map there. One option is to detour slightly inside of Philadelphia through the Schuylkill Center for Environmental Education, where there's some
Schuylkill Valley Nature Center.
Yeah. And they've got a new access to the trail there from the sort of bike trail. They have some pedestrian trails that bring you up. So you're more on the Philly side. If you're hugging right to the line, you can find your way up through some lands. And that's what we ended up doing. We sort of ended up walking up the hillside, finding our way on the back of the farm. And this time, all of a sudden, finding an abandoned old farmhouse that we sort of stumbled into some ruins that, again, I've walked this thing 6 times prior and had never seen these before, including going pretty close to there. So the farm, I think, spreads across across the border. I'm not sure there's a big meadow field. The line definitely goes right through it. I'm not sure which part is considered the farm or if they own land on both sides. But that's definitely an interesting and vast and surprising place to find oneself. It's covered in the snow. It was actually pretty spectacular.
I saw your pictures. It looked great.
Yeah, for those who haven't or who want to see, I've got a not super well edited selection of images, but I can pull up a quick screen share and sort of walk you guys through a quick around the city through the snapshots that I took, which are mostly documenting the things that were new to me or the things that were sort of the experience of our walkers along the way. So maybe I'll do that, but before I dive into a screen share, does anyone else have any other questions to throw out about the route or the experience?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Can you just like really briefly show how far you got each day? Like how was it 8 days?
So 6 days.
6 days.
It's essentially 5.5 days. I tell people 100 miles, although this year it was about 110. Last year was in September, I did 120. It really depends on which sort of zigzags and detours and backtracking you find yourself doing. But so segment 1, and to be really clear, the segments here, and we walked it here the same way that I did the first year. Those are completely arbitrary based on the experience that the 4 of us doing this artist residency that this project was born from did the first year. But the high school students who walked it in the fall did it in 15 days. Other people have done some chunks. Some folks who joined us walked a couple miles, and then got picked up and did a different segment. So it's kind of like the Appalachian Trail. You can do it in any number of contiguous or not contiguous segments. Rocky completed his first pass around this year after having done day 1, or the last leg 2 years ago, a couple other segments last year. You can piece it all together. But to answer your question, the way that I do it, day 1 or segment 1 is from Baltimore Avenue to City Line, up City Ave to Mequon. That's the first day. Second day is sort of a zigzag into Chestnut Hill, up around the Morris Arboretum, down Stenton Road, Ivy Hill Road, Cheltenham Avenue, up the rail lines, Tookenny Creek, Cotman Ave, and Burlholm, and ending at Fox Chase. Day 3 is a pretty ambitious one because of the amount of time it takes to get to your start and stop points from Center City. And then depending on how much you want to go bushwhacking in the Pequesson Creek, you have to sort of decide where you're going to stay close to the border and where you might cut a corner. But day 3 basically aims to go all the way up around the northeast, around the Pequotson Creek and down to where it hits the river at the Delaware at Glen Ford or the Torresdale Regional Rail Stop. This year, we did a lot of extra exploring up this way and adventuring. So the last little bit of the creek, we didn't go behind the mall and into the creek beds. We went just sort of cut the straight line along Knight Road, just like cutting a tiny little corner. We made up for it in other places. Day 4 takes you from Torresdale all the way down the river, past the sort of center city Penn's Landing stuff, down to the South Philly Walmart at Pier 68. Day 5 takes you down through some industrial lands, somehow finding your way around the Navy Yard and across the Schuylkill. We cross the Platte Bridge. And then you could sort of call it quits there and skip the airport. But again, day 5, the long way is to go all the way around the airport into Tinnigan Township to end at the airport. And that's quite an adventure. And then the first year we did it, we called it day 5.5 because it's half the length roughly of the others. The last day, the 6th segment is just from the airport through Heinz and back up Cobbs Creek to Baltimore Avenue.
So does Platte Bridge have a pedestrian?
It does. I highly recommend you take the south side because the north side will dump you onto the like highway ramp onto I-95. The south side is pretty accessible. Again, the closer bridge to the perimeter, because the perimeter is way out here. The closer bridge would be the 95 one on I-95. And that one actually, I've seen in subsequent years, there is a catwalk pedestrian walkway under the I-95 bridge. I've tried to find the place where you get onto it. On the FDR Park side of things, it starts about 40 feet in the air and is clearly meant for, you know, not people with grappling hooks, but people with specialized lift equipment who are doing emergency maintenance or whatever is needed there. So someday, with the permission of whatever authorities will get me up there with their blessing, I'd love to walk the 95 bridge. But this September, someone who was, you know, obstructed from the Platte Bridge by construction, they found their way over across to, what is it? It's Passyunk Avenue. And there's a thing that happens over and over again with this project. It's just like a great life lesson where you want to go a certain way to be close to the perimeter. And then you have a setback, you have an obstruction, you can't get across the footpath on the bridge, there's something's blocking you, or you have to take a detour. The gates are now closed and locked for whatever reason. And whenever we're bummed about this, you just apply what we call the Roomba Rule, which is like operating like a little robot vacuum cleaner and bumping your way around the obstacles like a mindless little robot, and you will find your way somehow. It just might involve all sorts of funny zigzag shapes. And if you look at the GPS tracks of the itinerary for this thing, the 7 times I've done it, they don't overlap. There's all sorts of little like weavings in and out in this way and double back. And the point is, whenever you do that, it sets you up for something else beautiful along the way at the next point or another discovery, or you'll see something you wouldn't have seen otherwise. So this adventure isn't really about being hardcore, I must be on the line of the perimeter. It's more about setting out in a spirit of discovery and adventure and being open to wherever it takes you to just sort of follow these guidelines and find your way around the city's edge and see where you end up. So, you guys like to see a couple pictures from this adventure? Or any other
I have a
questions?
quick question
Yeah,
before
great.
you leave the
Do
map.
it.
As you come south along the river
Mhm.
on maybe, what is that day? Were
That's
you
usually the
free
4th
there
day for me. Before.
What,
Or day 17
what-
if you're doing it in smaller segments.
what are you following along the river? Is that a river path or streets?
Good question. And the answer is both. There's some places where the Delaware River Trail is right on the edge of the river, and they've been adding to it, developing it, expanding it. There's a former rail bed that has been converted into a beautiful biking and walking trail. That's the scenic part of it. There's parts where you're out on State Road, which is a little bit more industrial, traffic, dreary, some weird contrasts of row homes and scrap metal recycling facilities. And you alternate on this leg. You go between beautiful park and scrap metal junkyard, and beautiful park and the prisons, and beautiful park and you know, just like weird construction sites. And you could make the choice to try to hug the river as much as you want to, or you could take the choice to walk a longer stretch of state roads. You know, sometimes it's all about what feels appropriate to you within reason. And so sometimes, you know, you'll find like, oh, if we zig down here, we can be closer to the river. for about 3 blocks, and then we have to go back out to State Road and walk a chunk of that. Sometimes we'll detour back because we got really close to the river here, but then we can't get past this, water treatment plant or whatnot. So now we have to double back out, and we're doing these serious like loop-de-loops. And again, I won't tell you there's a fixed route because it's more about this process. The day you do it, you might find a different way through. They may have developed the next section of the trail. There might be a gate that's wide open. There might be a gate that's closed. Who knows? But it is an interesting chunk of contrasts along the river's edge there for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Does someone else who walked that segment of the river want to share an observation? Because we're going to get into the part where I'm talking a lot and it's already been 20 minutes. So can one of you guys who's walked the river segment share an observation, a memory, a recollection?
JJ, this is Kathy.
Yeah.
When we started at Glen Ford, we saw 2 bald eagles,
Mm-hmm.
which was pretty exciting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the part that you were talking about where it was such a mix of industrial and row homes and the fire academy, the police academy,
Mm-hmm.
the prisons, and Four Seasons total landscaping.
Yes, we did stop there for a photo op this year. Mm-hmm. I think the prisons are worth re-mentioning just because I've spent some time visiting some friends in there. And the first year we did this, we were walking by the prisons, and the other and the writer that I had been matched with in this artist residency that led to this project, we realized that us who live a couple blocks away from each other in West Philly both knew someone in common who had spent some time in one of those prisons, because he hustles around our neighborhood looking for, landscaping work and that kind of thing. And we just sort of reflected on the fact that here we were, 4 white folks with a Knight Foundation grant doing this artist residency thing to take us from Southwest Philly up to where the prisons are by this circuitous, exploratory, fun adventure. Whereas most people who go from Southwest Philly up to the prisons are going by the school to prison pipeline, right? Are going by the sort of more direct and far less pleasant and far less fortunate set of circumstances. And so there's this irony in this project that it's this basic thing of doing, of human bodies walking in public space, human bodies out exploring their world. At the same time, doing this requires a chunk of privilege, requires having some gear, requires having some time to go in and be able to go and do this exploration. And we're mindful also that the way we were received, folks who might not look like me might be received in a different way, walking out of the creek onto the golf course, walking through a construction site that may or may not be fenced in. So many times we've seen, particularly people of color, being, having the police called on them and being received in ways that are not the way I'd be received. So there's a justice component to this. There's a question of how to make this experience accessible to all safely. How do we shape a world where we're all free to explore and get to know our city and be received in the same ways? That's a reason why when I was sort of offering up the Fringe Festival version in September and inviting people to make their own group and go off on their own, I made sure to sort of equip them with a lot of swag, right? Like lanyards and passport documents and t-shirts and whatnot with a little logo and a little map. So you could, and reflective safety belts also, knowing we can't guarantee anyone's safety when they're out doing this at your own risk, but at the same time, and not that anyone should have to justify their being out in the world, right? Like, you don't need my little passport document. You should be received with safety no matter who you are. But also just trying to be mindful of those factors as we are human bodies walking around in space. Yeah. Greg, do you have any thoughts on the river component?
I was really struck, first of all, they all blend together in my head because I did so many of the days. But I was really struck by wandering through Graffiti Pier and the moment we had where we encountered a man who, introduced himself as the caretaker of the pier to all of us. and we had sort of been wandering the pier, wondering how to get up to the higher levels. And as if by magic, the universe just conjured this guy up, who then showed us. And of course, I was far too chicken to actually scale up these small spikes that he'd put in the side of a tree to get up there. But there was someone else who wasn't even part of our group who immediately was up there taking photos just from overhearing the conversation. And I think that really struck me. And the other half of what really struck me about that was that as I was taking pictures from the pier, the view of downtown, I could see the ominous development going up very close to the pier. And then we all kind of collectively had this brief conversation about how, you know, in 10 years, they will have repainted the whole pier to then hire New York graffiti artists to come down and put graffiti on the pier to make it authentic, so they can have DJs and a bar and stuff for the people in this development. And it made me, well, first of all, I found it funny, but then I also found that idea very sad.
Yeah, yeah. And I know there are plans to develop Graffiti Pier as a park. And I know that they're working with the Amber Art and Design Collective, who are some local artists who I trust a little bit more to work with the community on that project. So let's hope it's done in a way that is sort of preserves the spirit and community and authenticity and beauty of that place while making it maybe more safely publicly accessible. But that's definitely a phenomenon in the two sides of the same phenomenon, really, in walking the edge of the city at the margins and doing it again and watching the city evolve, where there's the places that are crumbling and falling apart. There's the long abandoned industry, like whatever Graffiti Pier used to be, or those structures we saw up in the Northeast. And then there's the place where there might have just been a house fire, or, you know, the dentistry clinics like awning has collapsed this year. And then there's the new things coming. There's the, okay, this was vacant and now it's, you know, becoming a subdevelopment of housing, or this was industrial land that is being flattened down, and yeah, those new things are being built. So the city is constantly this dynamic thing in flux, and it's a sort of interesting to walk through it and see it evolve. One thing that comes up for me, and a lot of folks have mentioned, I'm wondering if any of you who've walked it can share an experience like this, is there's this thing of like coming somewhere that you've been before, but you're coming at it from a different angle. You're like, oh, I know this place, but now I understand how it fits into the shape of the city or connects to other parts of the city. Did any of you experience that this time around?
I know that I did, but in so many different ways that it would be hard to try to single a single instance out.
Mm-hmm. Sure. No worries.
Yeah, I felt like I walked that the part along the river, and I felt like we went in and out of my known universe a number of times. So that was really interesting. There was the part where we connected with you in the afternoon, JJ, that I am familiar with because of work. So we spent most of the morning in places that I hadn't been, and then, you know, found a familiar spot again, and then left, you know, into a neighborhood I wasn't familiar with, and then back to sort of center city. So yeah, that was interesting to sort of see those parts in context.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. For those of you who've walked it, have seen this, or have already gotten my folder full of images, but I'm going to do a quick zoom through a couple pictures. And when I say a couple pictures, is everyone seeing my screen share here? Let's see if I can. Are you guys seeing the 5 figures here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the first thing we found in the woods was a safe where clearly some criminals had, you know, gone and taken a safe. And this again, like, reflects on questions of how are we able to make to live our lives in the world, right? Someone clearly is forced to go and find, no judgment on the term criminal really, because clearly someone's in unfortunate circumstances if they have to find a safe and carve it open in the woods. But this was some interesting, the LEDs still lit in Cobbs Creek. Someone found a creative place to saw open a safe in the middle of the woods. The path goes on up Cobb's Creek. Just seeing it all in the snow was really different for me this year. These fields, places where people live, take shelter. This is that place at the Market Street terminal that you were talking about. And then the path does go back into the woods. And then across the golf courses, seeing them in the snow also, this weird vast, felt like everything being in the snow, less trash, also just made it feel like we were completely in a different, country. Taking shelter, having a snack, and this is boom onto City Avenue, where you can sort of see some woods from there, but really you got to follow the sidewalk, which was or was not plowed. And the snow got pretty heavy. So this was an intense first day. And then particularly this part up by Lancaster Avenue, every year I walk by this memorial to Philadelphians lost to gun violence and find it, every t-shirt is a life. And particularly seeing them popping out against the snow for me was really, really extra heartbreaking this year, but beautiful also. City Ave continues on. Here's that first leg that we've walked so far. And some things are different just by virtue of the pandemic. And these are things you would not have seen last year. We really geared up a little bit. Here's us getting ready to cross that City Ave bridge. And here's the view from it. Snow getting heavy over the Schuylkill. Fun thing is, here we're in the Philly. I always tend to err on the Philly side of the border, but the not Philly side of the border is just as valid. And here Rocky invited us to cross back outside of Philadelphia on the Pencoit Bridge, where there's, and Ross was laying some Trailblaze stickers. New development, new trail, coming up along an abandoned old rail bridge to get, so we zigzagged across the Schuylkill multiple times this time. And on this bridge, there was this piece of graffiti that I thought was really stunning, walking a long distance towards something better. So maybe what we're doing with this adventure. Manayunk, the Canal Trail, is a place that I've known well. Pause to take a little break in the snow there, and continuing on up the river past the frozen dam. This thing in the woods, I have no idea what it is. It's a strange little architectural garden adventure thing. And then here we find ourselves at the shut down rail station, hoping the regional rail is going to come and pick us up and that we're going to make it on time, because otherwise we have to wait 2 hours in the cold. Down to River Road, which is this really precious little segment of the city in a floodplain that, again, you feel like you're on a different planet or in a different country, where there's boats by the side of the river and these giant wind chimes. The guy who owns this property sent me a message on Instagram saying, I saw you guys walking by. He's a sports videographer, does video stuff for the NFL and whatnot, and also runs a tree nursery here. So by the side of this yard are all these tiny saplings. We made it to the first day. And so that's the first leg right there. I'm going to plow through these quickly because I didn't edit this really well, so I have a lot of pictures, but I'm also going to stop at the end of each day in case someone has a question about that chunk. Anyone want to jump in? Or just plow through all the pictures? All right, day 2, and this is the regional rail, not crowded, so it felt pretty safe from a pandemic perspective. Day 2 was starting real cold, nice early morning light. This is where Kathy and Chloe joined us. And we made our way right up the hill. So this, Sarah, this is your segment. We followed the hill and found that abandoned farmhouse. This is coming up on the farm fields where it's just sort of this vast open space. There are these places where all of a sudden things get really big and wide and open, which for me is a nice sense of spaciousness. A giant community garden up at the top there. One of my next door neighbors has a plot in here. And just interesting seeing these houses where there were some major renovations going on. These are the little like sparse houses that are off the grid. They use propane for heating or firewood because PGW doesn't go out there. But there's fire hydrants out there. Continuing on, this is the place where it's sort of like semi-suburban, and then we get onto the straight shot of Northwestern. To the right is Philadelphia, to the left is not Philadelphia. And they look pretty similar. On the left, there's a new development, brand new houses coming up. To the right, there's this ancient old farmhouse. When I think of a Philly house, I don't think of like an old barn, an old stone, but this is the Philly side right here, compared to this one. And continuing on Northwestern Avenue, you hit the top end of Fairmount Park, the Wissahickon Valley Park, and here I love just looking at these images. First, like Kathy was in conversation with Rocky, then Kathy was in conversation with Greg. There's this organic thing as you move along, the way the walk holds a space for people to connect and converse in this really fluid way. Sort of groups form and separate and reform. And that's one aspect of it that I really love. Here we're at the top of Forbidden Drive, all snowed in. We were there on a Monday, so the Cedars House Cafe was not open for us. They also had removed the porta potties at the top here, which is tragic, but Bruno's was just ahead and took care of us. Ken rejoined us here, and we went up around the Morris Arboretum. New construction, where we were matching the construction workers here with the safety vests. And continuing on Stanton Avenue, which is not the most pedestrian-friendly spot of land. Trees were filled with snow, looked like cherry blossoms, but we were lucky nothing was falling to this day. And we came upon these, this is where the first turn is. If y'all can still see me also, this is where the zig up from Stanton, first zig up towards Cheltenham. This is Ivy Hill Road starts here. And I thought these were, power distribution lines, but Rocky informed us that these were from an old train line. And it was really neat sort of hearing the history of this train line from Rocky. And that's where the walk shifts with every person that you have with you and what sort of life experience and knowledge they bring to it. And just these little things you notice by virtue, like I've walked by this place 7 times. This has probably always been there, this weird airmail, like 10 feet off the ground mailbox. But sort of, because we were walking on the west, not Philadelphia side of the road, I looked up and there it was, whereas from across the street, it's a little detail I never would have noticed. So also this construction site has been, those girders have been there since 2016, never a sign of life. And all of a sudden there are these boom lifts and construction workers walking around there. And I'm really curious if they're resuming construction after a 4-year delay and being out of money, or if they're dismantling a project that's being abandoned. Guess I'll find out in 6 months or a year, sort of what's happening with this site. Here's that dental clinic with all of a sudden its awning having a hole in it. And so Chloe immediately jumps in and says, oh, they've got a cavity because. They're also putting in a lot of new street poles on Cheltenham Avenue. Cheltenham Avenue is a long stretch. I didn't put in a lot of pictures from it here, but it's just sort of like a good 4 miles of stuff. But these funny squat little houses, this is a Philadelphia house and feels very not like your average Philly house to me also, right on Cheltenham Avenue, just east of Broad, I think. And continuing on, there are these trailblazers that people who walked in September left behind for us. And taking our breaks at some assorted establishments, taking time to take care of our feet, walking by some funny trees that feel real strange. You can tell like these are the trees in the city or on the city border where people are cutting them. And from there we go into Tacony Creek Park. And the border is basically a straight line here, but the path veers off to the right and takes us down across this bridge. We then double back and made a straight line where the border actually is, which brings us to some rail tracks, graffiti, continuing on. I'm going to pick up the pace because I'm rambling, but I'd actually rather be in conversation with you guys. A lot of good graffiti here as we followed the rail tracks up to the Fox Chase stop, and hopping over some creeks and making it to our second day. Those are our footprints from the regional rail as we were heading home. So that's the second day. Third day takes us up around the northeast, starting bright and early, following Pine Road by Fox Chase Farm, new construction coming along the way, these old houses we've seen. There's this fascinating big development that was all vacant when I first walked by in 2016. Now there are these little cookie cutter houses on one side in Abington Township, starting in the 400s in Abington School District. The other side is this vacant, empty land that is going to turn into a UPS distribution warehouse, or so I'm told. And so from here, you just sort of see the construction equipment in the distance, follow some deer track, and to the left is not Philadelphia, to the right is Philadelphia. And this was just magical for me, like being in this sort of snowy scape. Felt like we were in Antarctica all of a sudden, just from the snow-covered hills. But we're not far from the city. Those houses are in Philly, and we're just trying to find our way around. We flipped a coin here to decide whether we'd try to find our way around on the Philly side or to the not Philly side. This is a little bit more roundabout trekking into Philadelphia because we landed heads, I think. And So continuing on, finding our way through, or we thought we did, but actually here we're in a weird sort of middle ground where there's an electric fence on the left and some industrial site that we are not allowed onto. So we continue around, finding our way, finally making it through, and then ending up hopping back into some residential neighborhoods up in the Northeast here. There's a gorgeous cemetery up this way. And from this cemetery up onto County Line Road, just again, walking on the other side, I'd never noticed there's this little creek with this beautiful set of stone little bridges, stone wall. I'd always walked on the other side of the road, or I hadn't looked over. 6 times around, it's another new sweet detail. Then all of a sudden from County Line Road, the perimeter becomes a gas pipeline, and a straight line shot to the right here cuts through. Clearly someone's been driving their ATVs through there. And so we follow the line, but then we get to a creek that Rocky's comfortable jumping his way across, but the rest of us aren't quite. And so we come along, and before we find our way, Greg starts to be like, wait, I'm gonna build a bridge. And I'm completely cynical. I don't think that branch is strong enough. I don't think we're gonna be able to balance on it. I think this is, I'm like, we can jump, we can wrap plastic bags around our shoes, but I don't think we're gonna make it across that branch, Greg. I don't say this out loud because he's already figuring out how to do it, balancing his way with a tree branch, and it worked perfectly. So I followed him along in this path. Continuing on the other side, one more creek full of ducks. Rocky moves a couple rocks to help us hop across. And then we're continuing that last little bit of the Northeast before we get to the Pequescent Creek. This one, here it says brambles. It says wandering in the woods, stands of bamboo, brambles, real cool rail bridge. Finding our way under here where there's icicles. And then all of a sudden, random salad, someone tossed some celery and lettuce out of the snow. I'm not quite sure what happened, but we continue on and discover all the little details of the industry around us, and the trees that have toppled over, and houses that have been built. This is another place where those houses were being built in 2016. This next lot that we're walking through will probably be another development of houses eventually on the northeastern edge of the city. But again, and here we find our way to the secret bridge over Roosevelt Expressway that I'd stumbled my way into in September. This is my first time crossing it from this side. So every time finding a different path. Across this abandoned bridge and into Benjamin Rush State Park, where first thing we see are some deer, a lot of little baby deer here. And then we hear a sound off in the distance, and there's two, you can't see them in this wide angle frame, but two tiny remote controlled airplane having sort of a dogfight battle because there's a remote controlled airplane landing strip in Benjamin Rush State Park, along with a really beautiful set of community gardens. We continue on past the giant Amazon warehouse that I saw get built a couple years ago into this old abandoned structure. And this is another one of those marvelous moments where I was at the back of our group and I was like, I know this thing is in the woods to our right. I know the perimeter. If they walk past, I'm gonna tell them, stop guys, go look at this thing in the woods. But they spotted it, they went off and found it. And I thought, haha, here's the cool treasure. Like, I've seen it all and now I'm letting you discover it. And then Rocky's like, hey, there's this whole other thing over here. I'm like, what? There's this whole other thing over here. And so we go and explore it. And there's this new set of abandoned structures. And then Greg comes up and he's like, did you know there's this whole other set of things over there? And there's this whole compound of abandoned structures, including, I really love this tree that's growing right through the window, wrapping around the old window frame. I love the way that like solid wood is actually kind of fluid over time. So we could have spent, we did spend a bunch of time here, which is where towards the end of our day, we then had to sort of pick up the pace as we went through the rest of Northeast Philly. We hit Knight Road, and then I didn't take a lot of pictures because we just kind of cut through to the end of Knight Road as it was getting dark, and we ended up at the Torresdale stop. So that's halfway around the city. And I'm conscious of rambling while I'm throwing a lot of pictures at you. Do you guys want to see the rest of the pictures? Do you guys want to jump in with any questions? I saw a thumbs up, so I'm going to continue on. But I'm going to pick up the pace even more just so that we have time to talk a little more while being mindful of time. We don't have a hard end stop, but I want to wrap by 7 if we can. So that's our last, that's about 60 miles in, halfway around the city, regional rails, nice and clear. First morning, here's the part where we spent a little bit of time, like we'd already missed the sunrise. I told people who were driving, get here on time. Get here early if you can by like 6:58 to catch the sunrise over the river. It can be spectacular, but regional rail didn't get us here until 7. It was late, 7:15, 7:20. We're waiting for Kathy to park her car. Like, I could feel the antsiness of like, oh, we're missing the pretty morning light over the river. There was actually plenty of that. But when someone said, oh, we're missing the sunrise, what I said was, this is the moment where we will encounter something time-based later that will be amazing and perfectly timed. And if we hadn't had this sort of later start than expected, we wouldn't encounter it. So just remember that when that happens. And like Greg said, later we encountered this man who popped up like Puck and told us all about Graffiti Pier. And that was pretty spectacular. So all the timing works out. Here's Sam modeling a Fabulous Walk Around Philadelphia t-shirt. And thanks to the folks at Glen Ford, we actually had access to Glen Ford. I'd never set foot in there before. So we had bathrooms and we had just a glimpse inside this historic house that is also a wedding venue or whatnot. I'm not actively tracking the chat, but I see people are chatting at me. Okay, great, no worries. So here we are getting ready to start. And I'm worried, oh, are the friends who have been waiting on us late, you know, are they doing okay? Well, there they are having a great conversation. You know, again, someone mentioned in their survey that sort of one of the experiences is that the minute you start walking together, you feel like you belong together. And that's what I've seen happen over and over again, sort of the connections have happened. We had a bigger group on this day, friends who joined us. And here Ken has some stories about the neighborhood. So he's able to tell us a little bit about, you know, his experience in his youth around there. And I love how, you know, again, everyone has some expertise in this thing. So here we are, you know, right by the river, then bouncing out to State Road, then trying to get back to the river again, following the river for a while, trying to get close. Here's one of those places where we sort of like, all right, can we go around this way? There's this big no trespassing, like water treatment facility, but the rule is always just like, as long as you're on the outside of the no trespassing sign, you're fine, right? So we go around, we're like, oh, there's no way we're gonna make it around there. So we end up having to double back, find our way, and we're back out on State Road. Diane had to leave us here. Come across these things where they're still building some big, crazy water related things. Love these big pipes. And the construction site is a great opportunity to use a porta potty. And we come to the Fire Academy training grounds where they, you know, practice and train our firefighters and have some beautiful burnt out cars like these guys, and find our way onto a segment of the Delaware River Trail. And this is one of those strange segments that gets parts of it closed during the wintertime for reasons I don't understand. And so here all of a sudden at the end of the bridge, there's a gate and we take a little break. And it was possible that a member of our group might have a key to this gate, but it turns out that the lock is totally frozen solid. So we spent about 15 minutes with hand warmers wrapped around the lock to try to thaw it unsuccessfully. And so we then double back. But again, this is one of those double backs where we're like, okay, well, we get to see the geese and we get to notice some other parts of the firefighting land that we hadn't noticed before. And again, this is setting us up for the most perfectly timed stuff at the end of the day. So even though we've done a big loop detour out of our way, since we're setting out in a spirit of discovery, we're never worried about it. But then we do find the de-icer that would have been really useful on that lock. This is pretty comical at the construction site to stumble across the de-icer. And you know, here again, just coming back from a little bathroom break, I love what's happening in this picture because you just sort of see that everyone's paired up and is having these conversations, and there's a bunch of folks who are strangers to each other having these moments of connection along the way. And that's where post-pandemic, my dream for this project is to find the resources to, you know, do more matchmaking and bringing people together from different backgrounds to, you know, just share in this exploration together. So here we are walking by the prisons on State Road. It's definitely a little bit more of a dreary site, sad site. And here we are at Four Seasons Total Landscaping. You may have heard of them lately. They were apparently very used to people coming for photo ops. And here's the bit where it bounces from like sort of industrial stuff to row houses to all of a sudden, what's down this path? And I hadn't gone down this path, but Bill and Siobhan decided, hey, we can go down here, right? And be closer to the river. So we go. And we find ourselves walking through and into this land of abandoned vehicles, getting ready for scrapping, and post office trucks stacked on top of ambulances, lots of post office trucks, lots of ambulances, lots of hunks of scrap metal, lots of post office trucks. And weirdly, all of their markings have been blacked out, except for this one. And, you know, vehicles smashed together. It's a pretty wild place to be going through. And from there, all of a sudden, okay, a gate, but you walk through, you walk around the gate. We're using the Roomba rule here again to find our way around the obstacles. And here's a way through. And so all of a sudden now we're near some water construction, but we're at back on the Delaware River Trail. And we take a little break on this pier. Another good spot to like stop and take off a load and have a snack and continue on along the trail, where we find this strange little memorial. You're never going to guess the front. It's "Here lies the goat Chili. If you disrespect my man's, both of your parents will die," something. So this is an interesting memorial. And we continue on. Someone's clearly set up camp here, and we're trying to stay close to the water's edge, finding places where people are feeding cat colonies, and then having to do a bit of a detour here. Here we, again, find a fence we can't get around and have to loop back. We're sort of penned in. And we come to another part where the trail again, which you can access by multiple points from the north, comes to a closed and locked gate. But through fortuitous timing, the guy with the trash truck was driving by and he's like, "What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here. You're going to get locked in. I have to close the gate." We're like, "Well, can you let us out right now?" And so he let us through, and then he locked the gate right behind us. So that was some impeccable timing. Here we I part with the group as they go and discover Bridesburg, because I had a personal errand I had to run off onto. So someone who walked it, tell me something you saw in Bridesburg. Meeny, meeny, miny, mo. Tell me something about Bridesburg. I know you were there.
We walked past it might be another Superfund site. It's owned by some energy company I've never heard of. And we walked all around it, and we're kind of looking at these snowy ruins and like old rusted out oil barrels in the snow. It kind of looked post-apocalyptic on one side, but then on the other side, it's just Philly row homes.
Mm-hmm.
Very strange.
Yeah, there's a really interesting industrial history here. I love also, as you're coming into Bridesburg, there's a couple places where there's sort of like the chemical plant and the big pipelines going to the water, and then one random row house still standing in the midst of a parking lot where clearly there used to be a whole block of them that were demolished. There's two houses like that that are just sort of standing out on their own, the last people to cling onto this land amidst an industrial site that has sort of built a parking lot around them. So I rejoined the group at that park that I've forgotten. Is that Lardner's Point? No, what is the one right before? I've forgotten the name of this park now.
Pulaski, maybe?
Pulaski Park. Good call. Thank you, Rocky. And so here, there's a way through an industrial site again that leads us along some rail tracks. And I thought this was really pretty just in the snow. Again, the sort of lines of these rail tracks and these mountains of gravel or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden to the left, you're back in nature. And there used to be industrial sites here. And there's this one flipped over minivan vehicle. It's been there for years. I don't know what its story is, but it's pretty fascinating. It's sitting there in a field, flipped on its back, burnt out. Came down a big hill and realized that and these hills, I think, are made of rubble of previous industrial sites. I don't think they're natural per se. But sledding down on our butts was the easiest way to get down this safely. So we all took turns of sort of sledding our way down, which is great. And continuing on, we start to see the color popping in the snow of bits of graffiti as we approach the Graffiti Pier spot, which you can see starting off. And there's the musician having their photo shoot or making a music video in the far distance. Glimpse of the city, and to the right, those developments that Greg was telling us about. The pier it goes on for quite a distance. The first year I walked it, I hadn't gone all the way out to the end, but this time we did, and walked on through all these ever-changing graffiti landscapes. Someone's put up some swings, and as we're getting ready to leave, there he is, the guy who just popped up out of nowhere to tell us that he's the one who's put in the trash cans. He runs some sort of like clubhouse, rehab facility, art gallery. I didn't quite understand the structure of it, but it seems to be an Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous support space. He's lived in Kensington his whole life, and he and some helpers have adopted Graffiti Pier and are tending to it and picking up the trash and whatnot. So it was just sort of a treasure to run into him all of a sudden, and he's the one who told us about how to get up to the second level, although we didn't do it this time around. So after those adventures, there's his business card at the last stop. And we come back out into these sort of like mix of industry and there's that skyline we're recognizing, or the bridge, and the new construction popping up, other bits of scale, and noticing that the old abandoned power generation plant that are, I think, turning into condos has been power washed. So you see the sort of clean side and dirty side as they're renovating it. I think it's being turned into condos, I'm not sure. And here we're heading into sort of familiar territory. There's a little bit of the path that loops behind the casino, and out of nowhere, I recognize this. And again, the timing. If we had not been delayed earlier, would not be here just when my friend Kate was doing her daily walk. I thought she was still in Austin, but I recognize this bundled up figure, and it's my dear friend Kate, who's actually walked this little next segment of the perimeter with us a couple years ago in the past. So that was a treat of a surprise. And here we go into those, under the Ben Franklin Bridge, in the Cherry Street Pier, things that might be a little bit more familiar to us, but we're approaching, Penn's Landing, having come so far on this very different kind of trek adventure. So here we are coming down the Delaware, and the last little bit to the South Philly Walmart. So we're gonna go, if I continue this pace and show you the other slides for the other pictures, we're gonna go a little past 7, which I'm fine to do. And you guys are welcome to hang. I wanna be mindful of people's time and my rambling, and give another deep breath pause for maybe if anybody has a question for this part or about this process.
I just have a quick question, JJ. Have you ever thought about doing it counterclockwise?
Oh yeah. So there's this fascinating thing that happened the first year we did it, where there were all these places that we wandered into because there were no fences and no signs. And then we found ourselves on the wrong side of a fence and had to sort of climb out of or under of and escape from. And I'm pretty sure that the other way around, it would be different places that we would be able to wander into that were blocked off to us from the clockwise approach. There's so many different ways. The first year we did this, immediately we thought, oh, we want to go walk around other cities. Oh, we want to do this counterclockwise. Oh, we want to do this in different seasons. Oh, we want to invite all these different people to do this thing and do it, bringing in youth and elders, or do it, what's this walk like if you have, someone who has a knowledge of indigenous history, versus what's this walk like if you have someone who has a knowledge of geology, versus someone who has a knowledge of, zoning, all of these different expertise. So many different ways you can do this walk that's going to keep me busy for a long time. Every year I've done it in the same season and in the same direction. And it's always been new surprises and discoveries, and I haven't gotten bored with it yet. This September was the first time doing it in a different season, and that was a whole different experience. I'm sure at some point I'll do a counterclockwise version. And I know that some people who walked parts of it in September did go the other way. So there's definitely no reason other than there's a nice bit of element of tradition and ritual for me personally, doing it over and over again the same way and still being delighted and surprised by it every single time. But I'm definitely not saying anybody has to go clockwise. I'm sure you'll find different paths if you go counterclockwise. Anything else, anyone? All right, I'm going to jump you through the 5th segment, which starts off at the Walmart. And from here, we go quickly into more industrial realms. Abandoned ship, we sort of see the skyline receding in the distance, and sort of gas facilities that smell like they've got a leak. We've got our map, we've got our gear, we're under the bridge, we're passing by all their cargo containers. And then from here, this is kind of funny, there's this protected wetlands that are right next to these like big industrial things. And work in progress commercial, anticipated completion December 2015. So that didn't seem to happen, but here's the sign still. From here, we found our way. We were turned back by a security guard in the southeast corner of the Navy Yard, where they sort of keep all the cars. And so we found our way the next possible path, which led us up along these rail tracks. Rocky told us there used to be another segment of runway, airport stuff there. Strange abandoned old structures, which a person gives scale to. I'm not sure what this thing was for, but it's big, heavy wood. Industrial rail equipment, following this path along now into sort of the Navy Yard segments that we're used to. Big ships, cafe shut down because of COVID. We looked at the invoice of those stale rolls left inside the cafe. And they're from sometime in December for sure. Seeing how quickly things, shut down or businesses have had to make hard choices. Passing by the Urban Outfitters lots and the giant aircraft carrier, and interesting in some of the dry docks, there's actually some work happening. These were usually empty when I've walked by in the past, but this, some sort of tanker ship that provides fuel to other ships out in the world. Coming across the bridge here and by the Tasty Cake Factory. That's just salt on the ground, but when we walked by in September, the sugar silo actually had a spill and there was a giant pile of sugar on the road. You also, walking by here, learn some of the other ingredients of the Tasty Cakes, where they are labeled, the silos have labels of things like high fructose corn syrup, flour, sugar, and then things like filler fat. And the one silo on the left there is just labeled pie. And there's also a silo, the silo of pie, I don't know what it is. And then there's a silo of pan grease. These are the secret ingredients, pan grease and filler fat. At the base of the Platte Bridge, there's a new Wawa gas station being built, under construction. They've made some progress since I was last there, and we started our way across the bridge. From that bridge, you have a pretty great view of some of the refinery, energy yard stuff. And here we are at the top of the bridge, looking down on the other side. And if you look down further, I love all these trails that are, who's been walking around here? Are those human footprints? Are those animals? I think that's geese, actually. But just like all of those little interweaving trails. Looking off in the distance at the airport, but then mindful of looking down because it's super icy on this part of the bridge. There's this mattress on a roof that has been there for at least 4 years, and this pile of pallets that look pretty great in the snow. Then we come out by the DoubleTree, making our way, our first dead thing here. And normally you see dead stuff all along the perimeter, but most of it was buried in the snow. Same with the amount of trash we would normally see. The snow cover really sort of literally whitewashed the experience this time around. So out we go, take a little break in the hotel, look at the map they happen to have there. And from this part, in the distance, you can see my mural on the side of the parking garages, that tiny thing in the distance. And I really love that these two big projects, one being this 85,000 square foot mural on the side of the parking garages, and the other being this 100-mile-ish journey around the perimeter, they actually intersect in physical space. So in September, Ross had sent me a photo of himself wearing a Walk Around Philadelphia t-shirt in front of the How Philly Moves mural. And I hadn't really thought about it until then, but I just kind of am tickled that there's this literal, like, in real life space intersection between these two projects that are so near and dear to my heart. All of a sudden, there's another Four Seasons Total landscaping truck. Apparently, maybe they do the landscaping around the airport. We're not quite clear, but that was funny since they've been sort of noteworthy. And here we begin the big journey around Hog Island Road. And here, there's nothing, but that's really striking to me because the first year we walked by, there was an airplane here, sort of mothballed and wrapped entirely in blue plastic. And it looked like a weird toy, this blue plastic wrapped plane. And then over the last couple of years, the plastic has shredded and fallen off into tatters. And you see this old plane with its markings scraped off. And then it was still there in September, and all of a sudden it's gone. I have no idea where it's ended up. So doing this multiple times, again, this sort of changes you see along the way. Here's where there's a funny little zig in the perimeter outline, right? Which separates Fort Mifflin from the Sunoco pipeline operations. So you see that shape, like where it just takes funny little bits. But now we are squarely not in Philadelphia, continuing around the perimeter's edge, finding some more dead things and little piles of things, and we're approaching the UPS, some artwork at a bus stop. Underpaid slaves apparently is the acronym for UPS. And here's, I think, some generators or something relating to their operation. But before we go past all the UPS facilities, we take a detour down to the river where there's this nice sort of abandoned pier type scenario, looking across into Camden. Again, all the UPS trucks. And right about here, I say to everyone, this is our last little leg before the airport. But this is like, if we're going to run into some dead deer, here's where we're going to see them. And first there's the part where the planes fly over us and dead birds. It's around this bend that I make that call. And sure enough, there they are. It's a thing you see. And the reminder of death. It's hard sometimes, but it's also, for me, it's this thing to be grateful of, like seeing how rapidly life is arrested. For me, it's a reminder of the preciousness of this moment, this day we have together, this ability to walk together in the world. Could stop at any moment, right? And has for so many people. And so there's this mix of grief and gratitude there. And here we are completing that last leg, taking a little break before we wait for the train and the empty international arrivals. There was no one in here and it was really spooky. So we're 98 miles in and there's still another 10 miles to go the next day. And that is sort of accomplishing the majority of the perimeter. Last day is a mad scramble. Here, Xander comes dashing to join us at the regional rail because we didn't think we were going to make it. The ground was so iced over, but they made it. Here, we get a chance to, I'm showing off my little baggage claim exhibit to James. The mural is big and fancy, but I love the baggage claim exhibit because it includes everyone who'd participated in that project up until that point. And here we trek off. Walking out of the airport is pretty funny. It's not meant to be walked out of as a pedestrian. And we find our way into the Heinz Wildlife Refuge, which from here, you know, again, just like frozen wetland, beautiful birds and nature. This little sign up close, you see that sheet of ice that was covering everything, which is what made our morning start a little bit tricky. And here in the background, there's a tiny eagle. And here we heard the eagle. This is my first time seeing the eagles in Heinz, and hearing it and its song was really striking. It's not at all what I'd expected. Coming out of the Heinz Wildlife Refuge is where we ran into Kathy again, who came to intercept us. And from here, a super fun toxic waste land site that's being remediated. Playgrounds that have been partially dismantled. This is kind of, we joked that this is a puzzle we had to put together. But we continued on following Darby Creek and up to Cobbs Creek. There's a old pickup truck here buried in the muck, sinks in a little further every time I pass by. And this is where there's a little bit of tricky off-roading, even crawling on our hands and knees underneath some brambles, across some more fields and onto the end of the trail, which for us is the beginning of the trail as we come up Cobbs Creek Parkway, taking a little detour into Mount Moriah Cemetery. And then, and that's a highlight, discovering Mount Moriah Cemetery. Taking a little break there. This cemetery was abandoned for a while, and so parts of it are overgrown in the shrubs. And whenever I usually get there, it's after having walked 100 or so miles. So then at some point I really made the connection that it's actually right by my house and I can bike there in 12 minutes, or I can take, 95, 105 miles to walk there if I go the roundabout way. But since I've enjoyed biking there to just sort of discover it on my own. One last sort of adventure in some meadows down below the creek where someone's been making snowmen, which Rocky promptly decapitated. I don't have a lot of photos of the interactions because I was more focused on the walking, but I don't know if you get a sense from Xander's face here that they're having a good time, they're laughing, they're making jokes. This is what's happened along the way as people sort of make connections as they walk together, which is really what I love about this thing. Crossing that last little bit, here's Rocky about to do the last little leg that he hadn't walked his first year because he'd been called away from us. Some more trailblazers along the way. Giant tree that had fallen over. Here's a struck, there's a big boulder at the top that this tree roots were strong enough to lift this giant boulder up out of the ground and just hold it up there, a massive rock. And last little bit, and we come to the finish line, right where it started. So full circle, different experience. We then walked from there up Baltimore Avenue. But that's the end of this set of pictures, and I'll stop screen sharing now. So we're in a little overtime already. I'm not in a rush to cut out, but that's the full circle tour for this time around. It'll be different next time. It'll be different for anyone else who goes to try to do this on their own. So I'm curious. I'd love to hear from someone who has not walked any of this, if there's a particular place you're drawn to go and explore. Hazami.
Yeah, this is amazing. Your photos are fantastic. Are these with a phone, iPhone, or are you using a camera?
Oh yeah, these are just cell phone snapshots. I do my best to try to, it's weird. The first year I set myself the rule that I would not take any pictures as if I would only take pictures from the trail, because the way that I'd photograph a walk otherwise in my previous photojournalist life, would be carrying a lot of gear, sprinting ahead to the overpass, like running across the field to get the shot across the angle with a long lens. It would really take me out of the walk. So the first year I was really focused on staying with my 3 fellow walkers and just taking snapshots along the way. The second year I took far fewer photos and really only photographed. I was walking solo the second year and I only photographed what had changed, what really seemed new to me. Then I sort of slipped back into my documenter hat because now that I'm sort of making this an ongoing project that I'm inviting other people into, I've been trying to like photograph their experience of it in order to, facilitate inviting others into this thing. But it occurred to me that in doing that, I was feeling tugged away from the walking and back into the documenting realm. So I think sometime in the next couple of years, next year, the year after, there'll be an iteration of this where I take no photos and maybe just try a written piece to recap it, or storytelling only without pictures. But yeah, these are just all cell phone snapshots.
Oh, I can't imagine doing it without taking photos. I mean, it's such a visual experience too. I mean, at least for somebody who never hasn't walked this, I'm very intrigued by it. I just wish the weather, you could do it at a time when the weather is more amenable.
Well, there'll be another opportunity in September, so that'll be.
I will look out for that. Yeah, that was, you did it 2020, September 2020?
Yep. Yeah, that was sort of the kind of natural evolution of this thing growing a little bit, plus the pandemic and Fringe Festival trying to do a thing, but it seems like a good opportunity to literally, I've got a long history with the Fringe Festival, and this is literally an invitation to the fringes of the city. So I think I will do another Fringe Festival version this September, and now maybe it's a twice a year thing, depending on capacity and resources and so on and so forth. But yeah, you can do it any weather. So
yeah, I mean, I think the visual record, especially when you do it over several years, to see the changes, like those new houses that just popped up. I mean, they look so cheaply done and so quickly and so, whatever. It's like, how do they fit in this urban landscape? But yeah, it's really fascinating. Thank you for sharing. And I mean, bravo to all of you who braved the weather, the snow. And I mean, it looks picturesque now from us watching from a distance, but I'm sure you guys, did you stay warm enough? I mean, like
the first day was intense because of getting wet, actually. It started with drizzle and then the heavy snow was wet. And I realized my windproof gloves were not waterproof. And that was definitely a challenge. Then we were mostly well bundled. And when you don't stop, when you stop to move, all of a sudden you start to cool down pretty quickly. So the brakes were places to check. But maybe, I don't know, Chloe, do you want to talk to your experience of the weather you started on the cold morning?
Yeah, I mean, I really didn't feel cold all day, except when we first started out and we were walking in the snow, my feet were quite cold. But yeah, we all got hot. I think there was a point where we were all like stopping to take off layers. So, and then we were like eating outside of Dunkin' Donuts. And it was like a sunny day and it wasn't windy. And JJ was looking at what the temperature was and it said like 25 feels like 23, but we all felt like it was like 60 degrees outside. But it was good because like it was very cold and cold enough so that the snow stayed kind of powdery and didn't saturate our shoes. But the downside was that I was wearing maybe too thick socks for the size of my shoes, and now my toenails are very bruised.
Anyone else?
Well, I hope you all recuperate, but thank you very much. And I hope to stay in touch about the next one. And I guess do you research or follow up further with people like that you see along the way? I mean, you stay in touch with them in between. I noticed, like you said, down the river, there was one guy where the chimes were hanging, reached out to you, like you leave your business card or something with people along the way?
In bits, aspirationally, 5 years down the line, we've got a network of retreat, places to stay along the place, and like people who will open their doors and businesses and partnerships so that we can, use their restrooms. And there's limited capacity in my life right now for for that kind of research and outreach. There's some relationships that I've tended or some people I've kept track of. A couple people I want to send some more mail to and like find a couple contacts of like, hey, someone in these 6 houses, it'd be so great if you would give us your blessing to just like walk through your yard. So that's a thing that is ongoing relationship building for sure, and aspirational as I figure out, you know, where to get resource for this, how to scale it, how to invite it, other people in. And priority is reaching out to people who live on the perimeter and inviting them into this and perimeter programming kind of things versus facilitating people who live in other parts of the city getting to the perimeter and around it. Have all sorts of dreams and ambitions, and then it's a question of capacity and phasing and all of that. But yeah, it's been great. You meet fewer people around the city's edge than you would think, because so much of it is industrial and so much of it is natural, that you're not often in neighborhoods. But sometimes you meet some interesting characters, and then of course it depends on the time of day and when you happen to pass by and the weather and all of those things too, for sure. Yeah, thank you for joining us, Azami.
Ask about that actually, about
Yeah.
people, because I like wonder about these places are also kind of like mysterious and unknown to us, but like there are people who are like of the perimeter. So I was wondering like if you've ever heard of any of sort of like complications or unique experiences of like living or working in that space, because it's like, I know you were talking about seeing the houses that are sort of split between Philly and not Philly, so yeah.
I don't yet have those anecdotes in my repertoire, although I'm really curious about the things of like, yeah, if a tree falls or there's a sewage line, you know, that's obstructed and it's like happens to be in the part of your yard that's in Philadelphia or not Philadelphia, or you know, you need to have a contractor who works on your roof and a third of it is in Philadelphia or not Philadelphia, I'm not sure. Yeah, the experience of people who live on the border, and this is actually the expertise, you know, I mean, there's that little bit where Ken was telling us about his childhood near, you know, that part of the Northeast. I think, again, with more capacity, I would love to have people who live in those neighborhoods give us tours or sort of be guides through their parts of their neighborhoods. But then also to invite them to continue along to other parts of the city where other people might be their guides, and see how it all ties together for sure. Yeah. Jumping off the layers and dealing with weather, I'm curious if those of you who walked it had any other lessons learned or things that we should add to the packing list, or things you might recommend, like besides ice crampons and trekking poles, which we've already got. Are there any other things that you would recommend to someone going out to undertake this adventure? Maybe I'll throw that one.
Yeah, I found like the first day there were a bunch of things that I wish I had done differently, but the first day I had a cloth mask, or I had a bunch of cloth masks, and but they were right on my face, and I have these plastic things that keep it off of your face, but they were literally frozen and wet, and I couldn't breathe for a good chunk of the walk up City Avenue. And so there's things that vary like that based on the weather that I could have thought through better, but didn't spend a lot of time prepping the week before. But yeah, so I bought things or found things that helped in the rest of the walk. But yeah.
I'm curious, Sam, you've done individual segments over multiple years. Can you speak to your experience of that?
First of all, can you hear me okay? The Bluetooth is sometimes funky. Okay. So yeah, it was a really interesting experience having done it in 2019, segment 5, Walmart to the airport, and then this year doing the segment right before it, Glen Ford to Walmart, although I did have to be rescued at Spruce Street Harbor. I could not go on. But yeah, it was just, the mask thing was a very interesting shift because, you know, the thing that Ken just mentioned about having a cloth mask frozen, like that's not a thing that you had to deal with in the before times. Sorry, I accidentally swiped. So yeah, for me, it was like an interesting experience having a different crowd of folks, having different levels of fitness and like comfort on my feet, because I was thinking in 2019, you know, I was running more and like used to spending more time pounding the pavement, and that wasn't the case this year. And I'm like, my feet really hurt. Like, I felt like elephants had been stomping on them. But it was also this, even with the masks and like having this weird experience of like the condensation, like freezing and then being wet and all this stuff, it was just this beautiful thing that we could do outdoors, you know, with minimal risk. And yeah, and like I was thinking, JJ, before, sorry, I had to pick up my dog at daycare, so I was like off camera for a good chunk of this. But yeah, thinking about privilege, thinking about the fact that I could just decide to take the day off of work and do this, you know, the birthday portion. Yeah, it was just a beautiful experience. And as far as packing recommendations, I would say maybe even if you don't think you have to change your socks, maybe you do.
Bonus socks are definitely key. Rebecca, you also did like chunks over different years. Are there any things that you noticed besides the pandemic mask situation? What was it like for you coming back to the city's edge?
Things that I noticed that were different, is that what you mean?
Yeah, or just what's the experience like doing it a bit and then filling in another bit and, you know, coming to it this next year?
Yeah, I guess the thing I remember, so the segment that I did the first time was the half segment. So from the airport to Baltimore Avenue, which is only what, like 10 miles. And I remember being really exhausted and trying not to be outwardly grumpy, but just like noticing that my lack of energy was making me unhappy. And, you know, so expecting that doing 20 miles this past week was going to be just kind of miserable. And, you know, I had a blast and I was tired at the end of the day, but I wasn't miserable by any stretch of the imagination. And the only thing I can think of is that is about being well rested or not well rested. And, you know, it was not, I don't believe that it's about, for me, I don't think it was about exercise and being ready for a walk, but you know, there's no other explanation that I can come up with. And this isn't really the question that you asked me, but the piece of equipment that I was most excited or most glad that I had, I got myself a pair of waterproof socks, which doesn't, like, what is that? Like, have you ever even, like, why is that a thing? But it's like a wetsuit, but just for your feet. It was the best. My feet were dry. I'm like the oldest, holiest shoes, and it didn't matter. My feet were dry. And, you know, like, that's probably not on the list that you want to tell everyone, but it was fantastic.
Great. There's the optional bonus list, or there's the, when we have the partnership with REI or whatnot to provide specialized equipment for people, we'll put that on the list. Very cool. I'm grateful to all of y'all for jumping into this in assorted ways, from tackling the whole perimeter to just showing up this evening to, you know, engage with this idea. And I'm looking forward to the next phases of this thing, continuing to do it for my own discovery and continuing to try to invite other people into it. Does anyone have anything else they want to toss in before we wrap up for the day? I don't want to keep you on Zoom too long because, you know, we all sit and stare at screens a lot in this world. So maybe this is a good stopping point.
Thanks for sharing your adventure with us.
Of course. course. Thank you for joining in it.
Yeah, thanks,
Mark your calendar for September and or mid-February of next year, and we'll see what the next thing is. All right. Bye, all. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Good night.